Alright, this is part 99 of Nos4a2. Beneath the great tree. What did you just say, Victoria? Mannix asked. Last chance? I think this is your last chance. I would turn that bike around while you still can. Wayne, she called, ignoring Mannix and meeting her son's gaze directly. Hey, are you still thinking in reverse like your Grammy told you? Tell me you're still thinking in reverse. He stared at her blankly, as if she had asked him a question in a foreign language. His mouth hung partly open. Then slowly he said, Mom, hard, but trying, Mannix was smiling, but his upper lip drew back to show those crooked teeth of his, and Vic thought she saw the flicker of something like irritation pass across his gaunt features. What is this tomfoolery? Are you playing games, Wayne? Because I am all for games, just as long as I am not left out. What was that you just said? Nothing, Wayne said, in a tone of voice that suggested he genuinely meant it, was as confused as Mannix. Why? What did it sound like I said? He said he's mine, Mannix, Vic said. He said you can't take him. But I already have him, Victoria, Mannix said. I have him, and I am not letting go. Vic slipped the backpack off her shoulder and into her lap. She unzipped the bag, plunged a hand in, and lifted out one of the tight plastic sacks of Anfo. So help me, if you do not let him go, then Christmas is over for every fucking one of you. I'll blow this whole place right off its ledge. Mannix thumbed the fedora back on his head. My, how you cuss. I have never been able to get used to such language out of young women. I have always thought it makes a girl sound like the lowest sort of trash. The fat girl in the fur coat took another shuffling half-step forward. Her eyes, set back in small piggy folds, flashed red in a way that made Vic think of rabies. Vic gave the bike a smidge of gas, and it jumped forward a few feet. She wanted to put a bit of distance between her and the children closing in on her. She turned the Anfo over, found the timer, set it for what looked like about 5 minutes, pressed the button to start it running. In that instant, she expected a final annihilating flash of white light to wipe away the world, and her inside squeezed tight, preparing for some last rending burst of pain. Nothing of the sort happened. Nothing happened at all. Vic was not even sure it was running. It didn't make a sound. She held the plastic pack of Anfo over her head. There's a shitty little timer on this thing, Mannix. I think it'll go off in 3 minutes, but I could be wrong a minute or two in either direction. There's a whole bunch more in this sack. Send Wayne to me. Send him now. When he's on the bike, I turn it off. He said, What do you have there? It looks like one of those little pillows they give you on an airplane. I flew once, from St. Louis to Baton Rouge. I will never do that again. I was lucky to get off alive. It bounced the whole way as if it were on a string and God was playing a yo-yo with us. It's a bag of shit, Vic said. Like you. What did you say? It's Anfo, an enriched fertilizer. Soak the shit in diesel, and it's the most powerful explosive this side of a crate of TNT. Timothy McVeigh destroyed a 12-story federal building with a couple of these. I can do the same to your entire little world and everything in it. Even across a distance of 30 feet, Vic could see the calculation in his eyes while he thought it through. Then his smile broadened. I don't believe you'll do that. Blow yourself up and your son, too? You'd have to be crazy. Oh, man, she said, are you just figuring that out? His grin faded by degrees. His eyelids sank, and the expression in his eyes turned dull and disappointed. He opened his mouth then and screamed, and when he did, the moon opened its one eye and screamed with him. The eye of the moon was bloodshot and bulging, a sack of pus with an iris, its mouth like a jagged tear in the night. Its voice was Mannix's voice, so amplified that it was nearly deafening. Get her! Kill her! She came here to end Christmas! Kill her now! The ledge shook. The branches of that enormous Christmas tree flailed at the darkness. Vic lost her grip on the brake, and the Triumph jerked forward another 6 inches. The backpack full of Anfo slithered out of her lap and fell onto the cobblestones. The building shuddered beneath the shouting of the moon. Vic had never experienced an earthquake before, and could not catch her breath, and her terror was a wordless thing that existed below the level of conscious thought, below the level of language. The moon began to scream, just scream, an inarticulate roar of fury that caused falling snowflakes to whirl and blow about madly. The fat girl took a step and threw the hatchet at Vic, like an Apache in a western. The heavy, blunt edge clubbed Vic in her bad left knee. The pain was transcendent. Vic's hand came off the brick again, and the Triumph lunged once more. The backpack was not left behind, however, but was dragged along behind the Triumph. A strap had caught on the rear foot peg, which Lou had put down when he climbed on the bike behind her. Lou Comedy, as always, to the rescue. She still had the Anfo, even if it was out of reach. Anfo. She was now holding one package of Anfo, clutched to her chest with her left hand, the timer presumably ticking away. Not that it actually ticked or made any sound whatsoever to suggest that it was working. Get rid of it, she thought. Somewhere that will show him how much damage you can do with these things. The children surged at her. They rushed from beneath the tree, pouring onto the cobblestones. She heard the soft pattering of feet behind her. She looked around for Wayne and saw the tall girl still holding him. They stood beside the wraith, the girl behind him, with an arm gently encircling his chest. In her other hand was her crescent-shaped knife, which Vic knew she would use on Wayne before letting him go. In the next instant, a child leaped, throwing himself at her. Vic yanked the throttle. The Triumph bolted forward, and the child missed her entirely, crunched into the road on his stomach. The backpack full of Anfo skipped and bounced over the snowy cobblestones hung up on that rear peg. Vic gunned the bike straight at the Rolls-Royce, as if she meant to drive right into it. Mannix grabbed the little girl, Lori, and shrank back toward the open door, the protective gesture of any father. In that gesture, Vic understood everything. Whatever the children had become, whatever he had done to them, he had done to make them safe, to keep them from being run down by the world. He believed in his own decency with all his heart. So it was with every true monster, Vic supposed. She pushed down on the brake, clenching her teeth against the stabbing, ferocious pain in her left knee, and twisted the handlebars, and the bike was slung around almost 180 degrees. Behind her was a line of children, a dozen of them, running up the road after her. She gave it gas again, and the Triumph came screaming at them, and almost all of them scattered like dry leaves in a hurricane. One of them, though, a willowy girl in a pink nightdress, crouched and remained in Vic's path. Vic wanted to blow right through her, run her the fuck down, but at the last moment, Vic gave the handlebars a twist, trying to veer around her. She couldn't help herself, couldn't drive into a child. The bike wobbled dangerously on the slippery rocks and lost speed, and suddenly the girl was on the bike. Her claws, they were really the claws of an old crone with their long, ragged fingernails, grabbed Vic's leg, and the girl hauled herself up onto the seat behind her. Vic accelerated again, and the bike leaped forward, speeding up as it flung itself again around the rotary. The girl on the bike behind her was making noises, choked, snarling sounds, like a dog. One hand slipped around Vic's waist, and Vic almost shouted at the cold of it, a cold so intense it burned. The girl gripped a length of chain in the other hand, which she lifted and brought down on Vic's left knee, as if she somehow knew exactly what would hurt most. A firecracker went off behind Vic's kneecap, and she sobbed and shoved her elbow backward. The elbow struck the girl in her white face with its crackling enamel skin. The girl cried out, a strangled, broken sound, and Vic glanced back, and her heart gave a sick lurch in her chest, and she promptly lost control of the Triumph. The girl's pretty little face had deformed, lips stretching wide, becoming like the mouth of a fluke worm, a ragged pink hole encircled with teeth going all the way around her gullet. Her tongue was black, and her breath stank of old meat. She opened her mouth until it was wide enough for someone to put an arm down her throat, then clamped her teeth on Vic's shoulder. It was like being brushed by a chainsaw. The sleeve of Vic's t-shirt and the skin beneath were torn into a bloody mess. The bike went down on its right side, hit the ground with a spray of golden sparks, and slid screeching across the cobblestones. Vic did not know if she jumped or was thrown, only that she was already off the bike and tumbling, rolling across the bricks. She's down! She's down! Cut her! Kill her! The moon screamed, and the ground shook beneath her as if a convoy of 18-wheelers were thundering past. She was on her back, arms flung out, head on the stones. She stared at the silvered galleons of the clouds above her. Move. Vic tried to decide how badly she was hurt. She could not feel her left leg at all anymore. Move. Her right hip felt abraded and sore. She lifted her head slightly, and the world swooped around her in a nauseating suddenness. Move! Move! She blinked, and for an instant the sky was not filled was filled not with clouds but with static, a charged fury of black and white particles. Move! She sat up on her elbows and looked to her left. The Triumph had carried her halfway around the circle to one of the roads branching off into the amusement park. She stared across the rotary and saw children, perhaps as many as 50, streaming toward her through the dark in a silent run. Beyond them was the tree as tall as a 10-story building, and beyond that, somewhere, were the Wraith and Wayne. The moon glared down at her from the sky, its horrible, bloodshot eye bulging. "Scissors for the drifter, scissors for the bitch," bellowed the moon, but for an instant he flickered out of sight like a TV caught between channels. The sky was a chaos of white noise. Vic could even hear it hissing. Move, she thought, and then abruptly found herself on her feet, grabbing the motorcycle by the handlebars. She heaved her weight against it, crying out as a fresh jolt of withering pain passed through her left knee and her hip. The little girl with the lukewarm mouth had been thrown into the door of a shop on the corner, Charlie's Costume Carnival. She sat against the door, shaking her head as if to clear it. Vic saw that the white plastic sack of Anfo had somehow wound up between the girl's ankles. Anfo, Vic thought. The word had achieved the quality of a mantra, and she leaned over and grabbed the backpack still tangled on the rear peg. She slipped it loose, hung it on her shoulder, and put a leg over the bike. The children running at her should have been screaming or war-whooping or something, but they came in a silent rush, pouring out of the snowy central circle and spilling across the cobblestones. Vic jumped on the kickstart. The Triumph coughed, did nothing. She jumped again. One of the pipes, which was now broken loose and dangling over the cobblestones, puffed some watery exhaust, but the engine made only a tired choke sound and died. A rock hit the back of her head, and a black flash exploded behind her eyes. When her vision cleared, the sky was full of static again, for a moment, then blurred and reformed as clouds and darkness. She hit the kickstarter. She heard sprockets whirring, refusing to engage, going dead. The first of the children reached her. He did not have a weapon of any kind. Perhaps he was the one who had thrown the rock, but his jaw unhinged, opening into an obscene pink cavern filled with row upon row of teeth. He fastened his mouth on her bare leg. Fishhook teeth punctured meat, caught in muscle. Vic shouted in pain and kicked out with her right foot to shake the boy loose. Her heel struck the kickstarter, and the engine erupted into life. She grabbed the throttle, and the bike hurtled forward. The boy was yanked off his feet, flung to the stones, left behind. She looked over her shoulder as she raced down the side road toward the sleigh coaster and the reindeer go-round. 20, 30, perhaps 40 children sprinted down the road behind her, many of them barefoot, their heels whacking on the stones. The child who had been tossed into the doors of Charlie's Costume Carnival was sitting up now. She bent forward, reaching out for the white plastic sack of Anfo by her feet. There was a white flash. The explosion caused the air to ripple and warp with heat, and Vic believed for a moment that it would lift the bike off the road and fling it into the air. Every window on the street exploded. The white flash became a giant ball of flame. Charlie's Costume Carnival caved in and slid apart in an avalanche of flaming brickwork and a snowstorm of glittering pulverized glass. The flyer bleached out across the street, picked up a dozen children as if they were sticks, and tossed them into the night. Cobblestones erupted from the road and launched themselves into the air. The moon opened its mouth to cry out in horror, its one gray eye bulging in fury, and then the shockwave hit the false sky and the whole thing wobbled, like an image reflected in a funhouse mirror. The moon and stars and clouds dissolved into a field of white electrical snow. The blast carried down the street. Buildings shuddered. Vic inhaled a lungful of burned air, diesel smoke, and powdered brick. Then the wavering repercussions of the blast faded, and the sky flickered back into being. The moon screamed and screamed, sounds almost as loud and violent as the explosion itself. She sped past a hall of mirrors, past a waxwork, and onto the brightly lit and rotating carousel where wooden reindeer pranced in place of horses. Then she grabbed the brake and brought the bike to a fishtailing halt. Her hair was frizzled from the heat of the explosion. Her heart slugged in her chest. She looked back toward the debris field that had been the market square. She needed a moment to register, to accept what she was seeing. First one child, then another, then a third emerged from the smoke, coming down the road after her. One of them was still smoking, hair charred. Others were sitting up across the street. Vic saw a boy thoughtfully brush glass out of his hair. He should have been dead, had been picked up and thrown into a brick wall. Every bone in his body should have been smashed into chips. But there he was, getting to his feet, and Vic found that her weary mind was not entirely surprised by this development. The children caught in the explosion had been dead even before the bomb detonated, of course. They had not been any more dead now, or any less inclined to stop coming after her. She swung the backpack off her shoulder and checked its contents. She hadn't lost any. Lou had wired timers into 4 of the packs of Anfo, and one of which was now gone. There were a couple of other sacks of the Anfo down toward the bottom that had no timers on them at all. Vic slung the back over her shoulder and rode past the reindeer go-round and on another few hundred yards to the rear of the park and the great sleigh coaster. It was running empty, carts made to look like red sleighs diving and roaring past on the rails, swooping and rising into the night. It was an old-fashioned roller coaster, of the sort that had been popular in the 30s, made entirely of wood. The entrance was a great glowing face of Santa. You walked in through his mouth. Vic pulled out a sack of Anfo, set the timer for 5 minutes, tossed it in between Santa's gaping jaws. She was about to take off when she happened to look up at the roller coaster and saw the mummified bodies. Dozens of crucified men and women, their skin blackened and withered, eyes gone, their clothes filthy, frozen rags. A woman in pink leg warmers that screamed 1984 had been stripped to the waist. Christmas ornaments dangled from her pierced breasts. There was a shriveled man in jeans and a thick coat, with a beard that brought to mind Christ, sporting a holly wreath instead of a crown of thorns on his head. Vic was still staring up at the corpses like a child came out of the dark when a child came out of the dark and stuck a kitchen knife into the small of her back. He could not have been older than 10, and his cheeks were dimpled by a sweet, lovely smile. He was barefoot, wore overalls and a checkered shirt, and with his golden bangs and serene eyes, he was a perfect little Tom Sawyer. The knife was buried to the hilt, sinking into muscle, the springy tissue beneath, and perhaps perforating an intestine. She felt a pain unlike any she had ever experienced, a sharp and blessed twinge in her bowels, and she thought, with real surprise, "He just killed me. I just died." Tom Sawyer pulled the knife back out and laughed gaily. Her own son had never laughed with such easy pleasure. She did not know where the boy had come from. He seemed to have simply appeared. The night had thickened and made a child. "I want to play with you," he said. "Say and play scissors for the drifter." Sorry, my eyes bugging me. Okay. She could have hit him, elbowed him, kicked him, anything. Instead, she gave the bike throttle and simply roared away from him. He stepped aside and watched her go, still holding the blade, wet and shiny with her blood. He was still smiling, but his eyes were puzzled, brow furrowed with confusion, as if he were wondering, "Did I do something wrong?" The timers were imprecise. The first bag of Anfo had been set to go off in what she estimated was 5 minutes, but had taken closer to 10. She had set the timer on the sleigh house Anfo just exactly the same and should have had plenty of time to reach safe distance. But when she was less than 100 yards away, it erupted. The ground buckled beneath her seemed to roll like a wave. It felt as if the air itself were cooking. She drew a breath that was hot enough to sear her lungs. The bike staggered forward, the baking wind hammering at her shoulders, at her back. She felt a fresh, sharp twinge of pain in her abdomen, as if she were being stabbed all over again. The sleigh coaster collapsed in on itself like a shattering, roaring heap of kindling. One of the carts came free of the track and blazed through the night, a flaming missile that soared through the darkness and slammed into the reindeer go-round, smashing the white steeds to flinders. Steele screamed. She looked back just in time to see a rising mushroom cloud of flame and black smoke as the sleigh coaster toppled. She looked away, got the bike going again, weaving around the smoking head of a wooden reindeer, a rack of shattered antlers. She cut down another side street, one she believed would lead her back to the Rotary. There was a bad taste in her mouth. She spit blood. I am dying, she thought with surprising calm. She hardly slowed at the foot of the grand Ferris wheel. It was a beautiful thing. 1,000 blue will-o'-wisp lights aligned along its 100-foot spokes. Cabins roomy enough for a dozen people each, with black-tinted windows and gas lights glowing inside, rotated dreamily. Vic fished out another sack of info, set the timer for 5 minutes more or less, and hooked it upward. It caught in one of the spokes close to the central hub. Vic thought of her Raleigh turf burner, the way the wheels had whirred, and how she loved the autumn light in New England. She was not going back. She was never going to see that light again. Her mouth kept filling with blood. She was sitting in blood now. The stabbing sensation came in the smell of her back again and again, only it didn't hurt in any conventional sense. She recognized what she was feeling as pain, but it was also like childbirth, an experience bigger than pain, a feeling that something impossible was being made possible, that she was about to complete some enormous undertaking. She rode on and soon arrived back at the central rotary. Charlie's Costume Carnival, a solid tube of flame, barely recognizable as a building, stood on the corner 60 or 70 yards away. On the other side of the great Christmas tree was the parked Rolls-Royce. She could see the glow of its high headlights beneath the branches. She did not slow, but rode straight at the tree. Vic slipped the backpack off her left shoulder. She reached into it, her other hand on the throttle, found the last sack of info with a timer, twisted the dial, and pushed the button to start it running. The front tire skipped over a low stone curb, and she thumped up onto snow-dusted grass. The darkness congealed into shapes, children rising up before her. She was not sure they would move, thought they would hold their ground and force her to plow through them. Light rose around her, a great flash of reddish brilliance, and for an instant she could see her own shadow, impossibly long, rushing ahead of her. The children were illuminated in a ragged, uneven line, cold dolls in blood-stained pajamas, creatures armed with broken boards, knives, hammers, scissors. The world filled with a roar and the shriek of tortured metal. Snow whipped around, and the children were knocked to the dirt by the shockwave. Behind her, the Ferris wheel erupted outward in 2 jets of flame, and the great circle crashed itself down, dropping from its struts. The impact shook the world and knocked the sky over Christmas Land back into an agitation of static. The branches of the immense fir tree clawed at the night with a kind of hysteria, a giant fighting for its life. Vic sailed beneath the wind and flailing boughs. She flipped the backpack out of her lap, chucked it against the trunk, her Christmas gift for Charles Talent Mannix. Behind her, the Ferris wheel rolled into town with a great reverberating sound of iron grinding against stone. Then, like a penny that had rolled along a table and lost its momentum, it tilted to one side and fell upon a pair of buildings. Beyond the toppled Ferris wheel, beyond the ruin of the sleigh coaster, an enormous shelf of snow, loosed from the peaks of the high, dark mountain, began to crash down upon the back of Christmas Land. For all the deafening roars of explosions and collapsing buildings, there had been no sound yet like this. It was somehow more than sound, was a vibration felt as deep as bone. A blast of snow hit the towers and quaint shops at the back of the park. They were annihilated. Walls of colored rock blew outward from the oncoming avalanche and were promptly covered over. The rear of the town collapsed into itself and vanished in a roiling surf of snow, a tidal wave deep enough and broad enough to swallow Christmas Land whole. The ledge beneath shook so hard that Vic wondered if it might snap off the side of the mountain, drop the whole park into what? The emptiness that waited beyond the emptiness that waited beyond Charlie Mannix's pinched little imaginings. The narrow canyons of the roads filled with a flash flood of snow, high enough to consume everything before it. The avalanche did not fall upon Christmas Land so much as erase it. As the Triumph carried her across the rotary, the wraith came into sight. It stood covered in a fine film of brick dust, engine rumbling, and headlights glowing through air filled with fine particulate matter, a billion grains of ash, snow, and rock swirling on the hot, spark-filled wind. Vic glimpsed Charlie Mannix's little girl, the one named Lori, in the passenger seat of his car, peering out the side window into the sudden darkness. The lights of Christmasland had, in the last few moments, blinked out, all of them, and the only illumination that remained was the hissing white static above. Wayne was, by the open trunk of the car, twisting himself this way and that to be free of the girl, the one named Millie. Millie clutched him from behind, one arm reaching around his chest to hold a fistful of his filthy white shirt. In her other hand was that curious hooked knife. She was trying to pull it up to stick it through his throat, but he had her wrist, kept the blade down, and his face turned away from its questing edge. "You need to do what Daddy wants," she was screaming at him. "You need to get in the trunk. You have fussed long enough." And Mannix was moving. He had been at the driver's side door shoveling his precious lorry into the car, but now he stood across the uneven ground, swinging his silver hammer, looking soldierly in his legionnaire's coat, which was buttoned to the neck. Muscles bunched at the corners of his jaw. "Leave him, Millie. There isn't time," Mannix hollered at her. "Leave him and let's go." Millie sank her lukewarm teeth into Wayne's ear. Wayne screamed and thrashed and snapped his head, and the lobe of his ear parted completely with the rest of his face. He ducked and made a funny corkscrewing motion in the same instant and came right out of his t-shirt, leaving Millie holding an empty, blood-streaked rag. "Oh, Mom! Oh, Mom! Oh!" Wayne shouted, which was the same thing backward as it was forward. He took 2 running steps, slipped in the snow, went down on all fours in the road, and dust swirled in the air, and the darkness shook with cannonades, blocks of stone falling into more stone, 150,000 tons of snow, all the snow Charlie Mannix had ever seen and ever imagined, came crashing toward them, flattening everything before it. Mannix stalked on 6 strides from Wayne, already lifting his arm back to drop his silver hammer on Wayne's lowered head. It had been designed for crushing skulls, and Wayne's would be child's play. "Get out of my way, Charlie," Vic hollered. Mannix half turned as she blew past him. Her slipstream grabbed and spun him, sent him staggering back on his heels. Then the last of the info, the backpack of it, exploded beneath the tree and seemed to take the entire world with it.